Welcome to the 9 North Compass program. Throughout 2021, we will be hosting a series of listening sessions with expert panelists about different subject matters that's impacting our community. Today, we will be talking about human trafficking. Human trafficking, the trade of human beings for sex or labor, is an unprecedented phenomenon that is sweeping Minnesota. Minnesota has become a national hotspot for sex trafficking. 2 years ago this week, 110 men were arrested leading up to the Super Bowl in a sex trafficking sting. So, what are the factors that contribute to this sex trafficking boom within our community? What are the mechanics behind sex trafficking itself? And how can we as a community work to dismantle sex trafficking rings within our community? Today, we will be speaking to a panel of experts, all bringing very different points of view to this topic. So today I'd like to welcome our panelists, Officer Crystal Jones, the sex crime investigator with the Roseville Police Department. Welcome, Officer Jones.
Thank you, Dana.
I'd like to welcome Julie Wern, the CEO of the Roseville Visitors Association, as well as a board member of the Roseville Police Foundation. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Dana.
And Peter Wooler, the executive director of Source Minnesota, a nonprofit that provides recovery resources for trafficked victims, who is joining us from the field today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Dana. Honored to be here.
And we are also joined by Liz Fromholtz, sex trafficking specialist, also with Source Minnesota. Just in case Peter Wooler signal cuts out, she'll be able to jump into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Liz. So first question is for Officer Jones. I'd like to start by educating our viewers a little bit about what the difference is between human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, as well as sexual exploitation. Officer Jones, could you please give us some insight about that?
Sure. So human trafficking is sort of the umbrella term for all of these forms of trafficking. When we talk about trafficking at its core, it's based in force, fraud, and coercion. The differences between the subtypes is simply what the victims are being forced or coerced to do. And often we see an overlapping, and sex trafficking is specific to having victims perform sexual acts. There's both adults and children that are victims of sex trafficking in Minnesota and across the United States. Labor trafficking is more specific to victims being forced to perform labor services. It's essentially the modern version of slavery. It's difficult to draw a really clear line between sex trafficking and sexual exploitation because they do often overlap as well. But the best way to understand their differences is to consider that sex trafficking is more about somebody being forced to perform physical sex acts. And sexual exploitation is kind of more electronic. It's exchanging nude images. It's speaking about sexual communication using internet formats. And so it's kind of a secondary form of sexual trafficking.
So a quick follow-up question with that. You mentioned that there are multiple subgroups. Are there other subgroups that are not included in what we just covered?
I think that there are. Sex trafficking and labor trafficking are going to be the primary ones that I would say that there's not any major other subgroups besides those two, but there's even subgroups within those that have different kind of types of force or types of coercion or different types of acts. But in the end, you're looking at human trafficking at its core, as I said, is about control of another person, regardless of what you're having them do.
Thank you so much for that explanation. I think that'll really help our viewers as we navigate this conversation. So, my next question is for Peter. So, Peter, your organization, Source Minnesota, primarily works with victims to bring resources and aid as well as advocacy to hopefully get them out of the sex trafficked life. And I was reviewing your website, and there was a shocking number. I believe it said within 48 hours, a homeless youth will be approached by someone in the Twin Cities area for sex. So, and as we've heard, sex trafficking victims can be anyone, but there are specific push pull factors, being a homeless youth being one of them. Could you talk us through some other factors that increase the likeliness of being trafficked?
Well, probably the number one predominantly factor does have to do with poverty. When we're talking about homeless youth in Minnesota, we're talking about 13 to 20-year-olds are considered homeless youth. Over half of individuals are in foster care within our nation will be homeless within a year before they turn 19. And so those are situations, and we could go on with other different stats, but individuals that are coming out of broken homes, individuals that have very little resources, unfortunately, there is just an incredible market beyond what we really want to admit. And what's significant about homeless youth specifically is that we're not talking about kids that are in homeless families. Okay, so these are 13 to 20-year-olds completely on their own. I would say it's the most vulnerable population within our society. This group is less likely to advocate for themselves, or less likely to go to resources such as shelters or social workers, and so it makes them vulnerable. Is that they're on their own for the first time. And that statistic is put out by the Wilder Institute, that within that 48 hours they hit the street for the first time, they'll be approached by someone from the sex or the drug industry. And that just tells you the number of predators, number of individuals that are out there to victimize and take advantage of.
It's Thank you so much for that, Peter. I myself is I'm a foster care parent, so hearing that and tying that to it's just it really hurts my heart
Yep.
to hear that that is a basically a pipeline from foster care to this terrible life. So I'm hoping we can help dive a little deeper into that as well. So my next question is for Julie. So Julie, like I said in the introduction, back in 2018, the Super Bowl was here in Minneapolis, and historically, large sporting events brings waves of sex trafficking into communities. And in response, Minnesota does make it mandatory for hotel staff to take training. And you work with all the hotels and the hospitality organizations in the area. So, can you talk a little bit about what those programs look like and how it's implemented on the prevention side?
Yes, thank you. The Super Bowl was the thing that prompted the sex trafficking prevention training bill that passed in the spring of 2018. And this law requires that hotels and motels in Minnesota, all of Minnesota, provide specific training to their employees. And this training includes the definition of sex trafficking and awareness of it, how to recognize potential victims, how to identify activities commonly associated with sex trafficking, and effective responses in trafficking situations. And this is one of the poster sets that are required in all back of the house areas of hotels. The training materials were developed by the Minnesota Department of Health in consultation with the Minnesota Lodging Associations. They include a virtual presentation, which is a video with guided exercise, and a training companion guide that employees fill out after each virtual presentation to really hone in what they do need to look for. Plus, there's interviews with former Police Chief Rick Mathwig and now current Police Chief Erica Scheider, who discuss how a front desk employee in a real life situation was alerted to suspicious activity, called 911, which resulted in the arrest and conviction of a suspected pimp and the rescue of the trafficked victim. So those poster sets there are for the back of the house, they're for housekeeping, they're for the restaurant, the bar, front desk, lobby, and security. Hotel motel operators are required to do this training annually. If they have a new employee, they're required to have that employee trained within 90 days of coming on board. And then the training has got to be documented in the logger in the employee file annually. So hopefully this is going to keep all hotel employees in all aspects of departments aware of what to look for in the hotels.
Thank you so much for that. And I noticed that a lot of the posters are in different languages as well. So is this
Mali and
training perfect? That's great that we have that accessibility to all of our workers to be able to get this training and benefit our communities. So my next question is for Officer Jones. So, Officer Jones, traffickers recruit victims using deep psychological coercion, a lot of times fraud, deceit. And this is often referred to as the grooming period, I believe. Can you please tell us a little bit about the recruitment, the entrapment, and how that can come about?
Sure. So Peter kind of mentioned earlier that traffickers really exploit the vulnerabilities of these victims. And what we look at is what kind of vulnerabilities are being exploited. And it's amazing of what a range that there is. When we talk about homeless youth, that's obviously an access to basic resources such as housing. But there's also other extremes where we're looking at people that are seeking to fulfill their addiction to an illegal drug. And that's very commonly a motivator for victims to become involved in trafficking, because they're relying on those traffickers to give them their fix, kind of in exchange for services that they end up providing for the traffickers. Some of the methods of getting control or manipulating the victims are very obvious. It's a lot of threats and violence, but there's also kind of just as much that's pretty inconspicuous. And those are very effective on a younger population who kind of are seeking for attention from adults that aren't really their parents, that people that aren't really telling them what to do, like teachers or figures of authority, but they're looking for kind of adult friends in the sense that they're looking for a sense of belonging. So when we look at those vulnerabilities, we see several different examples, even here in Roseville, of how different the vulnerabilities kind of are used. For example, we had a recent case where a young man befriended an adult on social media and kind of used that relationship to discuss the youth's insecurity about his sexual orientation. And that conversation, as kind of innocent as it started, ended up in an exchange of nude images and eventually into an in-person meeting. So that was one way that the victim was looking for that reassurance and that sense of having somebody to talk to, and just kind of fell right into this trafficker's hands and maybe didn't realize it. And then we've had a lot of the kind of more, I would say, more common occurrences where we have a woman who was addicted to heroin and got involved with the trafficker to receive, heroin in return for the services that she provided, a prostitution sort of situation. We also had an adult woman who was vulnerable in terms of a disability. She lived in a group home and ran away from the group home and was seeking out help from somebody in terms of transportation and housing. That person ended up buying her an Uber and a hotel room for the night, and then that trafficker came over and made more of an intimate connection with that person and ended up taking them beyond just a night of free transportation and a free hotel room. So we've seen all of these different examples in Roseville, and as I said, it really just depends on the vulnerabilities, and traffickers are pretty intelligent at recognizing those vulnerabilities and either convincing the people that they can provide them or just providing the illusion that they can provide them to help that victim through something, and then they're hooked. They can't get out of that situation any longer.
So, a quick follow-up question. A lot of statistically, women and girls are the highest trafficked population. Are there times where traffickers will use other women to appeal to victims?
Absolutely. There's essentially a network that these traffickers develop. They really, when they stick their claws into sort of the vulnerable women and continue that manipulation throughout a period of time, those women are going to end up in turn almost becoming traffickers in themselves. They are going to see what their original trafficker is after and the benefits that they can get from essentially helping the trafficker. And they're going to be able to connect maybe a lot better with other populations that the original trafficker wasn't. So you see, a male trafficker, he starts out with a female that's being trafficked. They develop a really close relationship, a really needy relationship, and then you'll see that woman say, okay, well, I am really benefiting from this lifestyle almost, and so I'm going to help you even further, and I'm going to go after sort of new clients, new victims that I'm going to be able to connect with a little bit better than you are. And you often see that women are going to trust other women before they, trust men. And so that's kind of just a big way to bridge that gap into getting kind of new victims, fresh blood, as it were, to participate in trafficking.
Thank you for that insight, Officer. My next question is for Peter. So, Peter, the traumatic impact of human trafficking on victims runs deep. And with your work with Source Minnesota, you are, I'm sure, very knowledgeable in this aspect. But one aspect of the impact is the social stigma the victims endure. Can you speak to how the social stigma of sex trafficking can be a barrier for victims to get help, and what are some additional barriers for them to get help as well?
Um, the culture. I think that we like to think of individuals that are trafficked being in a certain culture, whether it's like inner city, low income, even women of color. But that really, as far as unfortunately, trafficking breaks all that. And so we have seen women of all ages, and this national statistics say as young as 13 as the average age of entering trafficking. We have seen women from inner city, from suburb, from outstate, from rural. We have seen individuals from low income, middle class, from high income. We have seen individuals that have been lured into trafficking that have been in college and at some of our local private institutions. Liz, who's on this call, and one of our other staff counseled 3 different families that had girls in. Actually, they lived in Roseville in private schools in Roseville that were being lured in by an individual that was 30 years old. And these were 15, 16-year-old girls. They had taken photos, had put them on the internet, and they were too afraid to come to their parents. And getting to your question about the stigma, you can imagine, just what individuals have to overcome. And one of our hearts is to really be a message that is able to get out. I think one of the key things we got to remember is someone who's in trauma, someone who has experienced trauma and victimization from a very young age, their idea of normal is usually not what probably most of the people on this call who are listening to this idea of normal is. And so a lot of times when you're in trauma, you are not thinking, you're more of a you're surviving, you're not thinking probably more than 48 hours in advance. You're thinking more of like just really basic needs. You're maybe just thinking, how can I get through this day with the least amount of harm to myself? And so you are thinking on just very rudimentary levels. Obviously, the stigma of someone coming out of trafficking or prostitution within our culture and society is very high. And one of the things that our heart is that as we come in contact with individuals, one, we'd be able to be a voice that individuals have worth and value. What they're experiencing, most likely what they've been told by different authority figures, by most likely their family, not always their family, but definitely their traffickers, is they have little worth and value. The only worth and value that they have is being objectified and what they can produce and what they can give out with their body. And then, and so for individuals to be able to think that to overcome that stigma, it's really important, right, that they become in contact with a community that doesn't want to objectify them, that does not want them put a label on them. And this is something that is very significant. It's really hard at times, even for individuals to return to families, because that stigma often is still with their family or what their family's view is. And so we talk about recovery resources. That is very significant. And there's two aspects of recovery resources. It comes from the term recovery capital, which is a chemical dependency term. And recovery capital or recovery resources, if there's a lot of major studies that talk about not just the importance of treatment, but what happens after treatment. So individuals that have a significant amount of recovery resources or recovery capital after treatment are the ones that are not going to return to the lifestyle, or the ones that are not going to return to old addictions. And so recovery resources can be summed up in twofold. One, it's opportunity for education and career. And two, it's a community for support and encouragement. And a lot of us are probably very familiar with AA. And, some of us have friends that went through AA 20, 25 years ago. And out after AA, they got support and encouragement, or they went through treatment, they had a job waiting for them, or they had a family to support them and give them encouragement to be able to live a sober lifestyle. Well, very similar with victims. Many times, even after they go through a treatment, there's really no community for them to return to. A lot of times what we see is women returning to the old neighborhood or even the old home that got them there in the first place. And so you can imagine just the significance it is when individuals can find that community. Our heart is that not only would we be giving, again, just the life skills, parenting skills, education, as well as career, but that they would be connected with community. And we try to connect individuals with congregations that are there to be, losing my lights, that are there to be able to be that community, to be a part of that recovery resources, to help to overcome individuals from that stigma that what's happened to them in the past is not their identity, that individuals do have worth and value, and there's hope for a future.
Thank you so much for that. So the key is building that community, and so people can build into this new space and hopefully shed that previous life. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the current climate of Roseville, Minnesota. So we're in the north suburbs area in regards to sex trafficking. So, and this could be for Officer Jones or Julie or Peter, whoever would like to chime in for this one. So one of the challenge with measuring that this is a fairly well concealed thing. Like we don't know what's happening all the time. But what successes have you seen specifically in this area in regards to sex trafficking and dismantling either the rings or these predators? And if you'd like to chime in, just let me know.
Yeah, so I can chime in first here. I think that the efforts related to the Super Bowl really brought out a knowledge base about our community that they didn't realize was happening. I think that it really shined a light on the fact that sex trafficking, and I know that there were specific details about child sex trafficking. I think a lot of Minnesotans didn't realize or didn't want to realize that those things were actually happening in our state. And specific to Roseville, and we see this not just with sex trafficking, but with a lot of other crimes, is our position on, some major highways right between Minneapolis and St. Paul, are two, major urban areas. We're seeing a lot of kind of overflow from these cities, and that's population, that's traveling. It's just a lot of different factors that people end up in Roseville a lot that don't actually live in our city. And we also have, a large number of hotels, and unfortunately, a lot of them are sort of hotels that don't have a great reputation. They don't charge a lot of money for you to stay in them for one night, which can be a benefit for people that are low income, but it's the same. It allows the same, traffickers to use those hotel rooms for potentially crimes as well. And so we see a lot of that overflow from St. Paul, Minneapolis, and our own cities, staying at these lower priced hotels. And I think that it's challenging really to measure our success using strictly enforcement efforts, because Roseville is the capacity of the Roseville Police Department is kind of limited to a lot of our proactive details rather than kind of are reactive to a lot of tips. We just don't get a ton of tips from our hotels and our citizens. And so when we go out and we do our proactive details, that's where most of our success comes from. But doing those proactive details requires a lot of resources. And so we're just not able to constantly do these really intensive, heavy resource details on a constant basis. So it depends on staffing and it depends on funding. So I would say that in addition to measuring our success through those enforcement efforts, we also need to consider measuring our success through the education efforts like we're doing tonight, because having our community and our hotels provide us with more of those tips allows us to get into situations that are not on the days that our details fall or the hotels that we typically arrange our details at. So it gives us a lot more flexibility to look into other areas of our city that we might not necessarily be focused on for sex trafficking purposes.
Thank you so much for that. So kind of leading into that prevention aspect, Julie, this question is for you. So you are on the police foundation board, and back in 2018, the board partnered with Source, I believe, on a three-pronged approach: education, enforcement, as well as the off-ramp to recovery. Can you tell us a little bit about that program, how it came to be, and the kind of the collaborative nature of how that came to be and the value it brings to Roseville?
Thank you. Yes, the chief approached us about doing something to combat sex trafficking in the city. So we put together a task force that our partners included Roseville Rotary, Visit Roseville, The Source, and Grace Church. And this initial task force, we met in August of 2018 and developed that three-pronged approach of education, enforcement, rescue, and recovery. And on the education side, my fellow Rotarian Lynn Megan and I met with the Roseville hotels to go over the sex trafficking prevention training. We reached out to the general managers and ran through the entire program with them so that they were then able to educate their employees. On the enforcement side, former Chief Mathwig initially requested $10,000 for three-string operations, and the Foundation, Rotary, Visit Roseville, and Grace Church all contributed to support to those operations. In fact, we had so much that the chief was able to do 4 sting operations. And that helped to create a new and improved template on how to monitor the advertisements, how to communicate with the various involved parties, and how to support the off-ramping for victims. With the rescue and recovery, it helped the police department develop a stronger and more streamlined approach with the source and allowed them to insert appropriate services on an ad hoc basis instead of solely during planned details. And the other big cool thing that came about it is we also helped create and promote a Freedom Flights community fundraiser that we hosted at Bent Distillery in April of 2019. And our featured speaker was Ramsey County Attorney John Choi and Peter. I think the community appreciated knowing that something was being done with some consistency about the issue. And then a discussion there between John Choi and former Chief Mathwig eventually led to a grant and Officer Jones's new position, which the city of Roseville extended. So that was a great community outreach that had a great result.
That sounds like such a great collaborative, like multi-organizational, especially with the grant funding, that's absolutely beneficial for the city. So thanks so much for giving us some insight on that.
And that grant would have never happened had John Choi not spoken, and Peter was quite eloquent. I mean, it was a great evening, but we received that grant specifically off of that event, and Officer Jones is with us today. So it was an amazing partnership.
That's amazing.
Actually, he was quite elegant that night, so I appreciate that.
You were you're very captivating.
If I can just add to that, Dana, I just want to say Roseville is really at the front end of this. I wish every police department would do a similar thing. We have over 400 police departments, if you count campuses in the state of Minnesota. That was very significant. The amount of individuals, we saw people, again, from all different cultures. We saw individuals where English was very much the second language. We saw some 18, 19-year-olds. We saw individuals who were dropped off by their pimp. Individuals who were on their own. But part of those operations, our advocacy team, I believe the women in that operation, I don't have time to go into detail of it, but the way the Roseville police officers treated the women was with a lot of honor and respect that I believe was a very big surprise to the women. Secondly, our teams were able to sit down and have a conversation. Again, a conversation about that they have worth and value, conversation to let them know of the resources, a conversation that let them know this doesn't have to be the normal, and to be able to plant those seeds. And I know that for many of those women, they have never had a conversation like that before, of just that nurturing, affirming, and positive. We were able to meet with some of the women after, as far as like them doing follow-up, which is also very significant, because again, it is kind of an intense situation. But then our staff was able to have interaction and be able to continue to have like casework, different development with them. And so I just want to applaud Roseville. And also, if on the sourcemn.org website, we actually have some interviews about freedom flights, and I'd like to point people to that. And our videographer did a great job. And again, I wish we've done this with several other departments, but I wish we would see 100 police departments in the state of Minnesota do the same thing. It would make an incredible impact.
That's so wonderful to hear that the people were able to come and you were able to create those connections, and how positive the Roseville Police Department has treated everybody. And that's just wonderful to hear. So Officer Jones, I have another follow-up question for you, specifically on IDing victims. So I did read in a 2019 report in the Minnesota legislature stated that about 38% of law enforcement were confident in their ability to identify victims. Can you tell us a little bit of why it's so difficult to ID sex trafficking victims, and give us a little insight on that?
Sure. So the primary reason that it's difficult to identify victims is they don't necessarily see themselves as victims. So when we intervene in a trafficking situation, we're very rarely met with a victim who has been just waiting to be saved by law enforcement. And these individuals, they've been so manipulated by their traffickers that they've developed sort of a Stockholm syndrome, where they rely on their trafficker for everything, and they come to have positive emotions toward them rather than negative emotions toward them. Specifically in sex trafficking situations, many female victims, they actually view their traffickers or their pimps as their quote unquote boyfriend, or the person that they have a child with. And so the intimacy of that relationship often causes victims to do anything that they can to protect not only themselves, but also their traffickers from being noticed by law enforcement. And sometimes that's the playing it cool when law enforcement is around and not, making a scene so that law enforcement ends up interacting with you. But it's also things like finding the name and the birthday of someone that looks similar to them so that if they are interacted, if they do interact with law enforcement, they provide that false name, and, a law enforcement officer that's maybe not reading the signs of a trafficking situation and is just looking, to identify this person to put their name in a report isn't going to do that extra follow-up and see, this person might be lying about their identity. Why is this person lying about their identity? It could be for a lot of different reasons. It could be simply to avoid prosecution for a crime that they're actively committing. It could be because they have warrants for crimes that they've committed, or it could be for a situation like trafficking where they don't want their real name associated with that trafficker because law enforcement might figure out that this is more than what meets the eye. We see that it's hard for law enforcement to recognize kind of those sex trafficking situations on the surface, because when we see these victims that have that really intimate connection with their traffickers and will do anything to avoid law enforcement detection. We can park outside of a hotel and we see a male and a female walking into the hotel together willingly, and that doesn't stand out to us. That's not going to ring any bells saying this is a weird situation, but that's often what it looks like. And so having the ability to kind of look deeper, to look at maybe that person's clothing, or if we, follow them in and we hear their conversations at the front desk as they're renting a room, those are things that kind of give us a better clue of this is a trafficking situation versus, just kind of a normal situation. But it is very difficult to recognize those situations when those victims they don't want to be victims and they don't want law enforcement to know that they're victims.
Yes,
and if I add to
go
that,
ahead, Peter.
And just, this is for the general public, I'm not sure people are aware, gone are the days, in the 70s, you'd go down to Hennepin Avenue and you would see women victimized by prostitution, and they would dress a certain way and they'd be in certain corners in certain areas, and it would be easy to identify. Now, not only do most women who are victimized by prostitution, they don't dress any differently most of the time, not always, but then also much of the solicitation is done online, and is done through different websites and different code words, or so it is a whole different, right, global internet world, for everything, including trying to identify, victims. And what Officer Jones said was very well stated.
No, a quick follow-up question for that, Peter. Yeah, so the internet is playing a huge role, but especially in this last year with the pandemic, have you seen any trends related to, more use on the internet? There's not people congregating around. What have you seen specifically in this past year that's different?
Right. Well, we are a pretty, there's there's a lot of different factors with our organization. One thing you might not be aware of is the epicenter of the riots was in the neighborhood where we have our outreach center, right off of Lake Street. And so for us, I didn't lose you. Are you still there?
We're still here.
Okay.
We lost your picture, but okay, you're back.
Okay.
Good.
So for us, the 2020 summer with the pandemic, with the riots that led to the homeless in the park and the increase of crime, had for those areas of Minneapolis that are those bordering neighborhoods, had an incredible increase of crimes, including victimization of women. So a lot of our outreach efforts went to homeless encampments, contacting or identifying the vulnerable women, making contact with them, making sure, asking if they were safe, making sure they're aware of resources. So I would not be the one to ask about have you seen an increase of internet with the pandemic. My kind of personal experience and point of view is it is really a huge problem, and there is a huge, unfortunately, supply and demand with this issue that everybody involved usually feels like we're doing a drop in the bucket. And I wish I could say differently. But one of the things that really motivates us is that to get the message out to women that there's opportunities to get out. Because I think the thing that breaks my heart the most is a woman that's involved and she doesn't think, again, it's back to that thing, she just thinks this is normal, and she kind of scoffs at the idea that there's a way out. So through law enforcement, through service providers, through employees at hotels, through churches, through neighbors that see things going on, to for women to know that there's people that care for them. One of the questions that we've got asked more than once, with those Operation Roseville Police, and we see this at other times, and it's a question that's asked that makes me happy we're there, but very sad because of the situation, is simply, why are you doing this? So when women don't believe that we're there and our heart is to help victims, and we don't have any other motivation but to do what's best for them, it's almost like a paradigm shift. And so the significance of that, and just the importance of that, just continues.
That's really heartbreaking to hear that drop in the bucket comment that you said, and that the victims are questioning why, essentially questioning their worth. Like, why would you go out of your way for me? So that's really heartbreaking to hear. My next question is for Julie. So, Julie, there's a lot of different apps. I had a chance to check a couple of them out, and one of them that caught my eye was Trafficking, where hotel stayers can take photographs of their rooms to upload it onto a national database for detectives and investigators to be able to recall those photographs quickly and help solve crimes in comparison to advertisements. So, have you seen any other tools that the hotels are using, or have you seen Traffic Cam used a lot?
I would have to say I have not seen traffic cam used a lot, but I think what is very encouraging, that on a national basis you have major hotel chains that are supporting efforts to end sex trafficking, and in our very own city of Minnesota, well, in our very own city, Marilyn Carlson Nelson, who's a retired CEO of Carlson Companies, which is a global travel company. She was the first major North American travel and hospitality company to take a stand against sexual abuse. And that's something that she continued. I think she started that in 2004, and she continued that on until her retirement. And Marriott International is now creating a program with the Global Fund to End Modern Slavery. And that aims to prepare trafficking survivors for careers in the hospitality industry. So that is super encouraging. And then there's other hotel chains that are setting up, when they have empty rooms, that they'll take in victims of sex trafficking. So there is a major concern with all of our national hotel corporations. And in Roseville, we have 12 hotel properties, and the majority of the properties do work with the police, and they do their annual training. They have the posters. They encourage their employees to look for victims of trafficking. We have problem hotels, but we're not. That's not just to Roseville. Every hotel community is going to have issues with sex trafficking. But I think Roseville, the majority of our Roseville hotel properties, work very well with the police.
What was the name of that program again that you said that where victims can then get jobs in the hospitality industry?
It's the
What was that?
Global Fund to End Modern Slavery.
That's amazing because similar to what Peter was saying, it's about building that community. So just something like that, where that now they can have a job within the hospitality
Right.
industry. That's huge. So that's
And the thing
really
with the
awesome.
thank you, and I apologize for cutting in, but the thing with the hospitality industry is that it is entry level up to C-suite. So you can start as a housekeeper, and you can start as a bellman, and you can truly work your way up to general manager of a hotel. That's the beauty of the industry, that it's every wage level.
That's really, really awesome. It's
Hmm.
great to hear about that program. Um, So I'd like to give each of you a minute to kind of do your last thoughts and any comments that you have for our viewers. It'd be great to hear what people can do in their own with their own personal control, what they can do to help. So if we can start with Peter, that'd be great.
Yeah, I would like to again just thank you guys for hosting this and having the opportunity. This is very significant to be able to bring the full aspects of our community together to continue. We can get to a point at times, I think, of getting awareness fatigue, but to continue to make people aware of what's going on, and to bring this to all different aspects of our community. Individuals can become more aware. We actually not only to help fund our efforts with anti-trafficking, but also to volunteer. There's a handful of different aspects. Just as we look at both a homeless population that is very vulnerable, and also for young women. And so churches or individuals are able to do different drives as far as like things like hats, gloves, socks. Those things are very feminine products. So we give out hygiene bags. Those things are very significant. For those of you that are part of the faith community, we have different awareness and prayer times you can also be aware of. We have typically done 2 to 3 seminars a year on this subject, which kind of got nixed. The seminars we're going to do last year in 2020 got nixed because of the obvious reasons, but we're going to be looking to do one at the end of April, early May, and then also one in the fall. That'll be more of a webinar. And so you can be looking for that website as well. And so again, I just want to say thanks, and it's been an honor, not just this call, but to be a part of Roseville, and we look forward to continue our relationship with both the Roseville Police and the Roseville community.
Thank you so much for the work that you do. We truly appreciate everything that you do, and that you are on assignment out right now, and you're able to take the time to call and shed awareness on what is going on within our community. So thank you so much, Peter.
Yeah, I'm Cala, Florida, where a lot of homeless youth migrate to. So it was about 78 muggy today, and I heard I picked the best week of the year to come do a Florida outreach. So,
Well, thank you for all the work that you do. Officer Jones, could you please, would you like to give us some comments, final thoughts?
Sure. I appreciate you having me as a representative for the police department here tonight. What I would say is, in terms of how the community can continue to help with these efforts, the really general slogan of "see something, say something" is going to be really huge, and recognizing that modern day human trafficking does not look like maybe the human trafficking that was seen, 10, 20 years ago. And so to just be aware on how human trafficking is changing within our environment. In the same token, the police department is continuing to change our efforts to keep updated with all of the modern forms of engaging in human trafficking, which a lot is on the internet and is online. And so, we have recently developed a community action team and recently gotten funding for growing staff here, and that's really, really important for us to be able to proactively go out and address these crimes. In the same token as our general crime rate increases over the years. So just having our community support is going to be really important. And as soon as COVID is over, we really plan to hit the ground running with additional human trafficking details.
Thank you so much for all the work that you do, Officer Jones. We really appreciate it. And thank you for this really valuable insight and the work that you do for Roseville.
Thank you.
So, Julie, could we have some last comments and thoughts of what you think about this topic and any type of action items that you feel the public could take?
Well, I'm just very proud of our police department, and you can tell by Officer Jones, I mean, how passionate she is. And then Peter, again, let's say eloquent speaker, because he spoke at our at the Bend Distillery, and then we brought him on to Roseville, and we actually taped his speech there with Chief Mathwig, and that's up on our Roseville Rotary website. And again, I echo Crystal. If you see something, say something. And I mean, that's the one thing. It's don't let it go by. If something is suspicious, the police are not going to be offended if you call 911 and it proves to be a false emergency. I mean, what if it is? What if you really are spotting something? And then the other thing is the Roseville Police Foundation. Our main source of funding to help fight trafficking is our annual golf tournament. So we hope, COVID permitting, that will take place in September, because that raises the majority of our funds for all of the operations that we do. And if you're interested in attending, or if you're interested in donating to our Roseville Police Foundation, go to the RosevillePoliceFoundation.com and just make sure it's not Roseville, California, because we have had some back and forth with California. So make sure you're on Roseville at Roseville, Minnesota, RosevillePoliceFoundation.com, and check out all the good things that we have done. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. And I'll mark my calendar for September for that golf tournament. That sounds like a fun way to help give back to the community. So thank you so much for the work that you do.
We might even bring Peter back in to speak.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And to our viewers at home, thank you so much for listening to this content and really educating yourselves about this really important topic that's going on within our community. So if you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and share. It really helps us out to get that information out to the community. So please smash that like button and share this with your friends. You've been watching 9 North Compass Programs.